of what I'm going to talk about today is, actually a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is stories from the history of archaeology that relate to this theme of public archaeology and public protest. So I think, again, to start, I want to explain why this is a useful thing to talk about in studying public archaeology. Yes. And again, this picks up on a lot of the themes I was talking about yesterday about the relationship between archaeologists and the public, and the fact that we have different audiences. So yeah, we have multiple audiences, different kinds of audiences in archaeology, and we need to understand the way in which our work can work for some audiences and not work for other audiences. And I found, working in public archaeology for a very long time, I have had a good number of disasters, failures, catastrophes. And I think these are the things that I've actually learned the most from, in lots of different ways. You learn when something is a disaster, you say, okay, I'm not doing that again. But more constructively, you learn what the limits are of our work, what are the points of tension and stress, the places where things will crack. And understanding that makes it easier to do better public archaeology.
I think this is something that it's very curious. We always read about excavations, which are fantastic. We found this, we discovered this method and so on, but nobody ever talks about excavations which went wrong, because we discovered at the end that we had eliminated important lawyers, or that we didn't have enough money to finish the excavation. We know just one case, Metropolitana di Milano, which was a big project, but they failed because they finished their fundings when they were still, I think, in the 15th century. So they had to destroy the real stratigraphy that they were looking for. So it's difficult to find excavation publications in which people say, we failed here, maybe next time is better. In public archaeology, I think it's a bit different, because there are a lot of failures. Many times you do a project and results are minimum or even negative for the community you have worked with, and that's very important also to publish and to talk about. Otherwise, when you do a project and it's a failure, you will think, I leave this, I don't want to continue, I'm a disaster. It happens to many people. So it's good that we have today this lecture to understand that also important public archaeologists have failures in their work.
Thank you. These are failures. They're revealing of lots of things. They're revealing of the work of public archaeology, but also they can also reveal something about the relationship between the archaeologists and the public and the context that we work in, the historical context, the political context, the economic context. I'm going to talk a little bit about some background history, but when I start to give the examples, you will see that most of the problems are not between archaeologists and the public, they're between the state and the public. And the question then is, where are the archaeologists? Are we part of the state, or are we part of the public, or are we a third party in between? And that's sometimes very hard to decide. So, what am I talking about? I'm going to look at some examples then of protests around archaeological excavations, mostly in the 20th century, or I'll start a little bit earlier. And again, most of my examples are from UK, one from Ireland. Apologies for not being more international on this. There are many good examples around the world of excavations that have become places of protest and argument and violent protest even, but I can't do everything today. I think it's interesting to look at the causes of these protests, to look at the attitudes of the protesters and the attitudes of the archaeologists, and as I said, the attitudes of the state or the government as well. And the underlying argument in most of these cases is who has ownership, who has control. I don't know if any of you have seen this idea of the question, who owns the past? I hate this. It's the most meaningless, stupid phrase, who owns the past? The past is not something you can own. Own, well, what do you mean by own? What do you mean by who? What do I mean by mean? But the fundamental thing, this idea of possession, control of the narratives of the past, the material remains of the past, this is the core of public archaeology. And this is something people often think is worth fighting over. So, focusing on audiences. Looking at this picture just quickly on the right-hand side here, this is the birth of archaeology. This is antiquarian excavations. This one, 19th century, from the outfits, I think early 19th century. And this is excavation of a burial mound. And you have, I think, the group of three. The guy on the left, he's the archaeologist. He does not get his hands in the dirt. The excavators are the guys on the left. They are the ones who do the digging. They are not archaeologists. They are workmen. They just dig. They don't understand. The archaeologist is the guy in that hat, and he is talking to the owners of the land. They are the public for this excavation. The people who own the land, by whose permission he does the excavation. Maybe he is a priest or the doctor. These are the people who used to do this kind of archaeology. And so if he's the doctor, he's the priest, he is middle class. He is bourgeois. Archaeology has always been a bourgeois activity from its origins through to now. It is middle class to its core. The people who own the land, they are interested. They come and look, they say, very nice, thank you. The people who work on the land, the people who are doing the archaeology, they are irrelevant in this version of archaeology. The public, the audience, is the elite only. And this is something that we see throughout the history of archaeology, the tensions around these. Who is the right kind of audience? Who is the wrong kind of audience? So here's a wonderful quote from an antiquarian, Reverend Brian Fawcett, writing in 1771 about his excavations. He says, "I know I'm liable to be pestered with a numerous set of troublesome spectators." So he knows people will come and watch his excavations. But the language, pestered, troublesome, he doesn't want these people there. So he describes that the excavation of the burial mound takes him 2 hours. This is not a good excavation. This is ripping the treasure out of the ground very fast. And he does it early in the morning. So he says, "We have little or no interruption, either from the curiosity or impertinence of passengers or other idle spectators." Passengers means people passing by in this context. So he doesn't want people passing by. He doesn't want people standing and watching. He says, "The teasingness and plague of whose ill-timed attendance is not to be conceived by those who, like myself, have had the disagreeable experience of it." Basically, he hates the public. He despises the public. They are annoying. They make his work impossible. He is not talking about the lord of the manor. He's talking about the ordinary people, the people who live and work on the land. And he hates them. And they probably hate him as well. But this is very clear. They are the wrong kind of audience, and he does not regard them as having any ownership of the archaeology. This is not their archaeology. The people buried in this buried around are not their ancestors. They are the elite. They are the ancestors of the elite. So
it's an idea that is very much present today. I mean, private archaeologists, many of them are students, continue saying, oh, it's horrible, we are in the center of the city and all people passes, they are annoying, they hate them. But at the same time, these troubles, for example, in Verona, what happened? People hated the archaeologists because archaeologists hated the people there. So it's quite present.
Yeah. So 250 years and nothing much changes. Yeah. No, and this kind of attitude, you can talk with archaeologists now. I get this kind of attitude as well. So it's not uncommon. I want to talk briefly now about a small public archaeology disaster of my work. This is a project I was doing last summer in the north of Spain. We're digging a medieval village. The village was destroyed in the start of the 15th century in a huge avalanche. So the village is completely destroyed. We dig through the remains of the avalanche to find the town underneath. And last year we were asked by the community where we work, can we have some activities for children? And they asked us the morning before the excavation begins, so no time to prepare, no warning, just we're bringing children tomorrow, prepare, which is very annoying. But I'm a very experienced public archaeologist. I can create activities for children very quickly. We get some part of earth, we bury some stuff, they dig it up, they have fun. We do all kinds of activities with them. This one here on the left-hand side, we did a replica of the destruction of the village in the avalanche. So we told them the story. And we said, okay, now you build the village. So you can't see maybe up here, the little tiny houses they made from the clay. Little houses, the little church. Yeah, it's not very clear. In the circle on the bottom left. So they build the village, and then we fill the wheelbarrow with water, with rock, and they go, pow, and we destroyed the village. They love this. The children love this. Everyone's covered in mud and dirt. They're having a great time. So for 1 week, we worked with these children. We taught them about why we do archaeology, what we're looking for, how it works. Then, after this ended, the excavation ended, we closed the excavation, we start to close the trench, we put down geotextiles. The same children, they came and they destroyed everything. They vandalized the excavation, and you can see on the right, they were destroying the sections of the trenches, they pulled down our cover, they pulled out all the textiles we put there. So we spend a week working with them, teaching them archaeology, teaching them to care about archaeology, and they destroyed it. This is very demoralizing. But also it's something for us to learn. What was our mistake here? Well, what did we not explain? Or what did we do wrong in our relationship with the children? Why did we not explain to them, well, what was our mistake with them? Because they're 8 years old. It's okay for them to be stupid. What was our mistake? And we have some theories about this, about we did not explain what happens at the end of an excavation. That just because we've finished and we've left, it doesn't mean it's a playground. It doesn't mean it's over, they can destroy it. We need to fill it back in, we need to do the recording. So our fault probably, but still at the time we were very angry. We called the police because we're legally obliged to report to the police destruction of an archaeological site. So the children had to speak with the police, which is very unpleasant. Yeah, we felt like we had failed in public archaeology with them. We'd failed to explain, and we'd created an unpleasant atmosphere. But we learned from it. And this year we'll go back there and we'll be working in the same place with the same people, and these children will be there again. We will find a better way of working with them this year. We'll learn.
Did they say why they you understood what was there?
No, after the police came, they wouldn't speak to us, which I understand. I wouldn't speak to the police either.
Do you think it was because they thought that after the excavation it's finished?
Probably, but also I think they had come to the excavation every day to do the activities, but also they felt like we were their friends. They came, they brought us puppies to play with, they brought us some food, which was terrible, but they wanted to play around the excavation and we told them to go away. But they wanted to be part of that world. And they felt a connection, I think. So when we leave, that's kind of hard. You build a connection and then you just leave. That's bad public archaeology. We had not understood the relationship properly. And we hadn't understood the difficulties of working with young people who are in a very marginalised situation. We learned. So I want to move back in time a bit and look again at the history of public archaeology. I want to compare two excavations in England in the 20th century. Maiden Castle excavations in the southwest of England, very rural area, in 1936 by Mortimer Wheeler on the left-hand side and his team. And then the excavation in 1954 in the centre of London, very urban excavation by Peter Grimes on the right-hand side. Both of these men were directors of the department where I work, so I have a connection with them. But they're two very different approaches to public archaeology in two very different time periods, and I'm interested in this. So the first one, Maiden Castle, several years of excavation there. Maiden Castle is an Iron Age hill fort, huge, I think the largest Iron Age hill fort in Europe. And it was excavated over several years, a very high standard of excavation for the time, very well-directed excavation. And it was an incredibly popular public excavation. This is one of the first excavations where public archaeology was part of the plan. From the beginnings, it was part of the plan because Wheeler, the director, did not have enough money to do the excavation. So he said, okay, he's a very entrepreneurial guy, very friendly with media, journalists. So he decided to make this dig a public dig, partly to bring in funding, and partly because he believed in public archaeology. He was a pioneer of public archaeology. So throughout the excavation, the public are invited to come and see the dig. Not only is the excavation made open, but they are advertising on the railway, in the magazines on the railway, in the news reports you see in the cinema before the film begins. Come to see Maiden Castle, come see the excavation. So people came there. They came from London on the train, they came from the towns around, and over the years of the excavation, about 12,000 people visited. And they walked around, and they looked in the trenches, and they spoke with the archaeologists. Everyone who was working there, all the excavators, were ordered, if the public speak to you, you answer them. If they ask you a question, you answer their question. You speak to them respectfully, and you stop your work, you talk to them. So public archaeology is part of the whole practice. And Maiden Castle, people travel from around the world to work there because it was known to be the best archaeology work taking place. Wheeler was the best instructor in archaeology. People came from Australia, China, America to learn archaeology here. And as they were learning archaeology, they learned public archaeology. And from these people, they were making money. they weren't making them pay to come to the excavation, but they were asking for money, asking for donations of money. They were selling postcards, photographs, and they were selling the artifacts. This is controversial. But they had thousands and thousands of pieces of pottery. Iron Age pottery is boring. It's not very interesting to look at. So they had bags of it, they count them, they weigh them, and then they sell them to the public. Ethically, this is problematic. But the financial effect is that 1/4 of the budget for the whole excavation for 3 years comes from the public. This is a very successful form of public archaeology. And they said that the people who come are very interested, and when they leave, they say, thank you, we're very grateful for this opportunity. This is the atmosphere of the excavation. And Wheeler says most of the visitors, they're working class people on their weekends, on their day off. So this is one example of public archaeology. And I want to...
Don't forget, that I think I'm not wrong, but correct me, Wheeler was one of the first archaeologists who also took part in television programs. The first television programs in England which had to do with archaeology, which were more quizzes and things like La Ruota della Fortuna. He was inside the program, and he was, I don't think the director, but he was one of the leaders there and presenting. So it was somebody who from the beginning understood the power of media to conduct archaeology and to transmit archaeology.
Absolutely, and he was very much the first celebrity, I think, in British archaeology. So then we moved to London, 1954. And this is the excavation of the Temple of Mithras. And this was supposed to be a very brief rescue archaeology project that takes maybe a few weeks. The work occurs and then the construction begins. Like a lot of the areas in the middle of London, this area was destroyed in bombing in the war, which creates opportunity for archaeology. And so this is what's discovered, the Temple of Mithras. In the middle there, they found some spectacular sculptures of heads that would have decorated the inside of the temple. And a journalist managed to get inside the excavation, take some photographs of these sculptured heads, and they appeared in the newspaper. And the result of this was this: thousands of people coming to see the excavation. People standing in the line for hours. People were climbing on the roof of the buildings around to see the excavation. This is huge public interest. And this is London, this is urban area. People working around there want to come and watch the excavation. But the excavation has ended, and the public are not welcome in there anyway. So they're interested, they're excited, they climb over the walls, they break the lock on the gates, they explore the excavation, they start to take souvenirs. There's some kind of chaos. So they say, okay, we'll continue the excavation and we will have it so every day 2,000 people can come and we will have tickets, it will be organised. And so again, people form big queues, thousands and thousands of people want to come. So at the end of the afternoon, there's no more tickets, people have been standing for hours, they're climbing over the walls, they're breaking in, they want to see the archaeology. And this attitude, they're excited about the archaeology, they want to see the archaeology, but they think that they damn well want to see it. You close the door, they'll climb over it. And Grimes, who was responsible for the excavation, he said, and this is his report, the whole thing had a curiously nightmarish quality. And you can imagine, like zombies climbing over the walls of your house. But something had changed. So before you have public excavation, wheelers dig, 1930s. Now you have 1950s. What has changed? The biggest thing is the Second World War. And one of the things in this war is this idea of the collective identity of the country. That we are together, that we now have welfare states, the national health, we have all the things which were owned by individuals, like the natural resources, the railways, they are owned by the government now, and this means they're owned by the people. So ordinary people feel they have some sense of ownership of the archaeology. And this is reflected in this idea that this is our archaeology, you shut the door, this is not fair, this belongs to us. And this idea that they are entitled to the archaeology, the public have a stake in archaeology, the public have some sense of ownership, is part of what drives all of the protests that I'm interested in. And again, when we're working with our public, what we are trying to do, and a lot of the time, is trying to encourage them to feel a connection with the past. To say that these things we're finding near your home or your workplace or your school, you have a connection with this. This is not some old alien thing. This has relevance to you and your heritage. This is our aim in public archaeology. The problem is when people believe us. When they say, okay, you're right, this is our heritage. Now, you, archaeologists, off you go, this is ours now. This is the problem. Or maybe it's not a problem. Maybe it's an opportunity, I don't know. So I'm going to talk through now some stories of protests in archaeology. The first one in Dublin, Wood Quay. And this is excavation in advance of a very large construction project right in the centre of Dublin by the river. And this is about 15,000 square metre area, and it contained what they discovered to be the original Viking city of Dublin, with around 100 houses, remains of houses and buildings, remains of parts of the old wall of the city, and about 3 or 4 metres of stratigraphy, a lot of it waterlogged and very well preserved. Really fantastic archaeology. However, because of the plan to develop the area, there was not enough resources, not enough time or the financial resources to do proper archaeology of everything. So before the archaeology ended, they began the construction work and they began to destroy the archaeology. This is so far so common. But early in the excavation, people who are in Dublin, in the area, they become interested. They start to campaign for the protection of the archaeology. And there was a group founded called the Friends of Medieval Dublin. And the founders of this are mostly academics, not academic archaeologists, but historians, scholars of Irish history and folklore, and some priests as well. And they formed a pressure group. They tried to bring a legal argument for stopping the construction, a legal argument for more time and money for the archaeology. And as part of this, they organised a huge rally, a huge march of people through Dublin to support the protection of the archaeology. 20,000 people took part in this march with placards and banners about the protection of the archaeology. And many of the people who were involved in this campaign, involved in the march, were politicians, Dublin councillors, people who were part of the local politics of that area as well. this was not successful. The legal approach was not successful. They were defeated because the people who wanted to build on the land and the government who owned the land were very keen for the development to take place. They were not interested in years more of archaeology, expensive archaeology for not very much result as far as they could see. And many of the most senior archaeologists in Ireland were on the side of the government because they worked for the government, or they worked in universities for the government. So they were not supporting the public. One of the most important professors of Irish archaeology said, well, why do we care? It's just an old hole in the ground. Which is not a helpful thing to say, and and there is a long history in Ireland of corruption around construction work and corruption in archaeology as well. So this is an issue to think about. So after the failure of the legal approach, they tried the illegal approach, and they did a thing called Operation Sitrick. Sitrick was a medieval king of Ireland, I believe. 52 of the people involved in the campaign climbed into the area of the excavation in the middle of the night. They set up tents and they refused to leave. They occupied the site to prevent construction vehicles arriving, to prevent the archaeologists from being kicked out, and to prevent the construction work that was beginning to destroy the archaeology. And these include politicians, nationally renowned figures. This is not some scrappy anarchist. This is important people taking part in this, occupying the archaeology. And you can see the documentaries, the news they filmed at the time. You can see it online. The construction workers were very angry, very threatening with them. But they stayed there for 3 weeks until finally there was a legal way of forcing them to leave the site eventually. So the occupation ended after 3 weeks, but they were successful in the longer term because the government allowed an extension of 2 years more archaeological work, and they funded 2 years more archaeological work. So in this case, the protest was successful. But it took a huge amount of political pressure and political interest. And it helped, I think, that many of the people involved, the most senior people, were priests as well.
What was the role of archaeologists working there? Were they neutral? Were they with the people wanting the excavation, or were they dependent on the state, so they couldn't say much?
The senior archaeologists working on the site were quietly supportive of the protests, yes. The younger ones, the students from the university who were working on the site, they were very supportive of the protest as well. And some of them are now professors in Ireland, so it all comes around, yeah. So this is an interesting one to look at, and again, like I said before, it's not the public versus archaeologists so much as the public versus the state power, but the argument is about the archaeology. And this one, the second one I want to look at, in England in the mid-1980s. This is just for context. Sorry, yes?
But who paid the excavation in the case of the wood Who paid?
Who paid for the excavation? I think it was a government.
Okay.
Funding. I think this is... Yes, I don't think it was paid for by the people who were building the building. The idea of developers paying for archaeology only emerges later, I think. So this is still an era where there is a national archaeological funding. So that's why, in a way, it's a question of politics rather than economics. Or politics has power over economics, yeah. Is that enough answer? Great. So, Battle of the Beanfield. This is England in the mid-1980s, just after the end of the miners' strike, the strike of coal miners, which is one of the most traumatic events in recent British history, and was characterised by huge amounts of very brutal policing of the miners and the people taking part in the strike. Very violent, very disproportionate, and an idea that the miners and the supporters and people on the political left are the enemy within. That in England they are subversive. So this is the political atmosphere of this event. But this takes us back to one of the most controversial places in British archaeology, Stonehenge. People are fighting about Stonehenge for hundreds of years. People are still fighting about Stonehenge. So from the mid-1970s, there began to be an annual festival in Stonehenge at the summer solstice. So the longest day of the year, when the sun rises a certain way above the stones, blah, blah, blah. So it's the usual kind of festival, lots of music, lots of drugs, lots of people with long hair and not many clothes on. You can imagine the kind of thing. And this lasts for 10 years, and then Stonehenge moves from the control of the Department of the Environment in the government to English Heritage, the National Heritage Organisation, and we will hear more about English Heritage in these other talks. So the year that English Heritage take control of Stonehenge, the festival causes problems. There's arguments that the people who attend the festival are digging holes around the site to use as toilets, to throw rubbish in, that they are destroying the archaeology. And this is probably true. And so the year after that, there is a legal case that says the festival cannot occur again. The festival ends. This is not popular with the people who are taking part in the festival, many of whom they travel around the country from festival to festival. They live in cars and vans. They don't necessarily they don't work. I think the phrase we use is New Age travellers. So are permanent hippies, basically the kind of people the police really hate. And this is, again, part of the problem. So what happens? Violence is what happens. Despite the festival being made illegal, around 600 people try to get to Stonehenge anyway, in a convoy of cars and trucks with flowers and shit painted all over them. And there are 1,500 police there to try and stop them arriving in Stonehenge. So the convoy is blocked. There are roadblocks everywhere to stop them getting near to Stonehenge. The police are everywhere. Eventually, the protesters, the festival convoy, they move their vehicles into a field, a privately owned field, and the police then destroy their vehicles. They destroy them. They smash the windows and they burn the vehicles. And they also attack the people there. They beat them up. They injure hundreds of people. They're beating children. They're beating pregnant women. People holding babies. There is video of this. There were journalists there who were filming the violence. And when the journalists returned to their companies, the films they took of the police violence mysteriously disappeared. So it took many, many years before the police were held responsible for this, and the people who were injured were given damages, and at least one police officer was held responsible for the violence. But it was a systematic, large-scale attack on people who were trying to celebrate the solstice in Stonehenge. And it was one of the worst episodes of violence by the police in British history. So afterwards, for 15 years afterwards, Stonehenge, every year when the summer solstice comes around, there was police everywhere to prevent these kind of things everywhere. They would create a huge police guard around the area. And particularly the Druids and pagans who claimed they had a religious right to access Stonehenge were very annoyed with this, because they said, this is our temple, this is our holy place for our religions, and we are not being allowed to perform our religious ceremonies in our temple on the most holy point of the year. And some of them who were particularly involved, this guy here calls himself King Arthur Pendragon. He was arrested pretty much every year. He lived in a caravan near Stonehenge, and he claims that he is the senior Druid in Britain. And I met him at Stonehenge a few years ago, because he's there almost all the time. And I was there taking some of my students there. So we talked to him, and I said to him, what's the significance of King Arthur and Stonehenge? What's the connection? He says, no connection. He says, I am King Arthur reincarnated, but this is completely irrelevant to my work at Stonehenge. Fair enough. He also sold me a photograph of him with his autograph on it for £1, which is very nice. And then he said, so where are you guys from? And I said, we're from UCL, Institute of Archaeology. And he says, you've got the bones! My colleague, Mike Parker Pearson, who excavates at Stonehenge, I don't know if any of you have heard of Mike Parker Pearson, he's an amazing archaeologist. He had the skeleton remains from Stonehenge. And Arthur basically said, you tell Mike I'm coming to get the bones back. So that was quite fun. But the bigger picture here, English heritage were, for these people, the enemy. And then from 1999 onwards, they allowed limited access to Stonehenge. So have any of you visited Stonehenge? Yeah, one or two? It's very rigid. You have to arrive to one place about a mile away. You buy a very expensive ticket, you climb on a little bus, they drive you to Stonehenge, you can walk around a big circle a long way from the stones. You don't get near the stones. You walk around it and then you'll go home. This is not a very interesting experience. It's a very expensive, boring experience. But on the solstice now, every year, for one evening, Stonehenge is open. And people can walk in the stones, and they can have Druid rituals, pagan rituals, they can light candles, and every year they leave rubbish everywhere. So they don't really love the site very much. They want to have a party and leave mess everywhere. But the result of the English heritage action at Stonehenge and the lingering anger around the violence of your police means that there has been a very bad relationship between pagans, Druids and archaeologists in Britain for a very long time. And this has been a relationship of tension, and this has had other impacts as well.
Yeah, but on a certain way, it's not fair. We hear about the Stonehenge practically in all the conferences, because it's not fair that normal people, let's say, and archaeologists and so on, can have just the experience with the bus, and then because they got angry, they can go directly there one day. I mean, okay, go there one day in the solstice, but it should be, I don't know, one day a month. Everybody can go there. I mean, it's absurd, this thing.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And you archaeologists did not strike because you cannot go there one day a month to visit it? Should you?
Well, when we take the students there is another thing where you pay even more money, and you arrive at maybe 6 o'clock in the morning. Then you can go inside the domes in a very small group. But it's very expensive, and there are security guards there, and they're watching you all the time. If you touch the stone like this, you're out. They throw you out. These guys are ex-army. They will grab you and throw you out the site.
So would you recommend the best experience is go there, smoke a bit,
Yeah.
go on a tweet stay?
Absolutely, yeah. That's the real experience of Stonehenge. And also, if you see somebody like lighting a candle under the stone, this is the archaeological way. So yeah, but also the people who find it the hardest are the staff who work for English Heritage at Stonehenge, because they are looking after the site all year round, and then once a year the site is completely destroyed and covered in rubbish. And I've talked to them. They said it's the worst part of their job. The morning after this is to go and pick up all the rubbish and clean the dirt, the paint from the stones. Yeah, it's not a good solution. But the alternative, it seems, is violence.
Sorry, I have another question about the people who were in charge for the site. So before it was a DOE, then English Heritage. Do you think that the DOE was not really controlling the site, so they can noticed that people were doing something like digging holes or whatever, and then English Heritage did, and then chaos happened? Or really things changed because we don't know why the crowd became absolutely uncontrollable that year, and it was just, I don't know, happened by chance?
That's a good question. For a very long time, Stonehenge was completely open. You could park your car and walk into the stones. And partly this worked because it was a popular place to go, but not crazy popular. It was not promoted as the heritage site of all of England. Bam, this is it. So people would come. My mum remembers going there maybe 50 years ago. And yeah, you just walk in. You just walk around the stones. You touch the stones. You climb on the stones. I think what changed over time is Druidism was invented, or became more popular. These New Age religions became more popular in the 1970s and 80s. And they decided that Stonehenge was a sacred place. So Druids are Iron Age, Stonehenge is not, but that doesn't matter to them. When you're inventing a religion, you can invent whatever you want, you know. So I think it was a problem which emerged and got gradually worse and worse. But I think even if there had not been destruction, and there's still arguments about whether it was serious damage or not, there was a political backlash against the kind of people who were attending the festival. And that was not just about Stonehenge, that was nationally. They were being driven away from the places they were camping, they were being attacked by the police on a small scale everywhere. Some of them were protesting outside American nuclear air bases, that kind of thing. So there was a political element there that cannot be separated from this. So yeah, I don't really know which came first. Okay, so more English heritage stupidity then. So we'll move forward a few years. Another henge. Well, it's not really a henge, but then technically Stonehenge is not a henge either. For those of you who are interested, and I don't care if you are, I'm going to show you anyway. Most of these kind of ring monuments, you have a ditch outside, and then you have an earth bank, and then you have another ditch. So this is, the circular site. This is what you have at Stonehenge. A henge is where you have the bank outside, then the ditch inside. So anyway, so this is why Stonehenge is not actually a henge, for anyone who cares. Seahenge, also not a henge. Seahenge is a Bronze Age timber circle. This is a circle of 55 oak tree stakes in the ground, in a circle, around a stump of a tree which has been turned upside down so the roots of the tree are upwards. And this was discovered in around 1999 by a man walking on the beach near his house. This site was covered in some earth and some peat, and this had been gradually eroding in the seawater. You can see the remains of the brown earth around it, which is being eroded. So they dated the timbers using dendrochronology to exactly 2049 BC. So they know exactly what year those trees were all cut down, which is very nice indeed. And English Heritage carried out some limited excavations, 1998, 1999, because they were limited because the sea was covering the site every few hours, and then the tide would change and the sea would uncover it. So you could only excavate for a few hours, and then everything you were digging would be destroyed again. You have to start again. So it's kind of a hard place to work, slow work. But it was a nice piece of archaeology. There was some interest from the local people. And then in 1999, in the second year of archaeology, there was a coverage of the site in the national press, and one of the journalists named the site Seahenge, like Stonehenge, but by the sea. And this created a lot more interest and popularity around the place. So some of the first people to arrive there are the pagans, who decided the site had spiritual significance, and they claimed what they said is a kind of spiritual ownership of the wooden circle. So the pagans and the druids are very keen for the site to be preserved in place. Now this is not going to happen. The site is being destroyed by the seawater. The excavation is to rescue it before it's destroyed completely. The pagans say, okay, that's the natural way. If the sea is going to destroy it, that's what's supposed to happen. We should let the sea wash it away and let nature blah, blah, blah. Some people in the local tourist industry are also very happy that the site is there, because they like the fact that tourists are coming, they're spending money on ice creams and hotels, so the tourist industry is keen for the wooden circle to be preserved. On the other hand, wildlife preservation organisations are saying, please get rid of this henge, because these tourists are destroying the ecosystem for these rare birds which migrate in this part of the east of England. So please remove this so the tourists will go away. English Heritage, who are carrying out the excavation, have been doing it for 2 years. Only after 2 years do they decide they should speak with the local people and find out what they want. So they arrange a meeting in the town hall. Somehow they send the most arrogant, incompetent archaeologists who alienate the local community completely with their arrogance and their sense of ownership and the idea that local people have no claim. Basically, that they felt they were informing the local people, this is what is about to happen. There is no idea they are consulting with the local people at all. And also, by this time, the work has been taking place for 2 years. The site has been damaged because someone with a chainsaw sliced pieces of the wood so they could take the tree ring dating. But this was very upsetting for a lot of people who care about the site as well. And because of English heritage incompetence, they created an alliance between the local people and the pagans. Now, I've worked in this part of the east of England for many years in public archaeology, so I know the kind of people who live in this area. They are very wealthy. The homes they have there are their holiday homes. They own a big house in London or wherever, and they own a big house up here as well. So they are rich elites. They do not like pagans. They don't like dirty, hippie scum. So if you manage to create an alliance between the local people and the pagans, you've really screwed up. English heritage really screwed up. And this caused problems. So first thing you have is the pagans start occupying the site to try and prevent the archaeology. So they come and they are sitting on the stones, on the timber, and they're playing the little whistles and being annoying. And they're there to stop the archaeologists removing the timbers. Some archaeologists who I know decided to visit them and talk to them and say, okay, we're not like them, we're the multivocal post-processual archaeologists and we care about your perspective on this heritage. And the pagans said to them, great, nice to meet you, we need your help. There is an international Jewish conspiracy to destroy our English national heritage here. So the pagans turn out to be fascists. So the archaeologists who were sympathetic with them run away. Eventually the timbers are removed, and you can see that there, basically you are pulled out of the ground with diggers, and while this is taking place, the protesters are being physically restrained by the police. While one of them runs onto the site while the digger is pulling the earth, and the archaeologists grab her and hand her over to the police. And this is not an ideal end. So the timbers are removed, they are preserved, they are still, you can see them in a museum, they look like not very much. Out of their context, then they're just old pieces of wood. But the enduring legacy of this is enormous harm to the relationship between local people, pagans, English heritage, and archaeologists. As I say, this is around the year 2000. In 2002, I started doing some public archaeology work, maybe 25 kilometres away from here. And everyone I spoke to in the village I was working in knew about this. They knew about the way archaeologists work. They knew that we were there to kick them off their land, to destroy their archaeology. So the damage of this kind of bad public archaeology is very widespread.
And which is now in our days still worse, because as you see there, this is, let's say, local journals. When it happened, this kind of things 20 years ago or 10 years ago, it was more local. And this big thing that I think about Italy, there's some excavation with protests and so on, it gets local. But today, everything gets very global because of Facebook, and the idea that this is about archaeology is transmitted in all places. Everybody knows about what we do, so it's quite dangerous, I think.
Yeah. So what do we have? We have number 4.
Oh.
One more, maybe. So this is the Rose Theatre in London. Does anyone recognise the man in the middle there?
you know about this example?
Oh, Gandalf. This is, Gandalf Magneto? Yeah, Ian McKellen. Sir Ian McKellen, the actor. I think the guy on the left, is that? Yeah, I think that's Voldemort on the left there. And the other ones, I'm not sure who they are. So this is the Archaeology of the Rose Theatre in London. And the Rose is one of the oldest theatres in London. Many of you visited the Globe Theatre in London, where they reconstructed the theatre as it was 400 years ago. The Rose is even older, and it's known historically as one of the most famous theatres in London, one of the first buildings that were constructed as a theatre for plays, not adapted, it's an original theatre. And it's where many of Shakespeare's most famous plays were performed for the first time. And so no one knew exactly where it was, so it was a surprise to everyone when it was discovered in excavations in the south of London in 1989. And these were standard excavations carried out in advance of the construction of a large building. And the site was extremely well preserved. You can see the outline of the whole outline of the building, the geometrical outline, and the floor of the theatre where the people were standing was made of a mixture of earth and hazelnut shells, because this creates a very hard surface. So this was found perfectly preserved. In fact, the floor surface was so hard still they had to smash it with machines because it was such a well-preserved floor. And this was a very exciting discovery, exciting for archaeologists and exciting for everyone who cares about Shakespeare as well. And I think, he's wearing a t-shirt that says willpower, so William Shakespeare Power. So everyone's excited. This is a great Shakespearean archaeology. Unfortunately, there is no legal protection for the site. It's not a scheduled ancient monument, so English Heritage say, sorry, nothing we can do about this, the site is going to be destroyed. Again, English Heritage. Not that I have anything against English Heritage, some of my friends work for English Heritage, but they tend, as an organisation, to be evil. So, what happens? A bunch of actors form a campaign to save the Rose. And this becomes quite like the Wood Quay campaign in Dublin 20 years earlier. You have celebrities, actors Laurence Olivier, Dustin Hoffman, etc., who are giving money for this campaign. They are coming to London, they're speaking in front of the site saying, save the Rose, blah, blah, blah. And again, English Heritage, think about it, they say actually no, because if they did more archaeology, they would have to pay the people who own the site, the people who are building the building on the site, they would have to give them financial compensation for the construction work being delayed. So they are not willing to pay the money for this to take place. So the campaign turns from legal campaigning and protesting to illegal occupation. And you have actors chaining themselves to this site. They're very dramatic people. So they're not just standing there, they're standing in front of the bulldozers, standing in front of the vehicles, and they're reciting Shakespeare plays while they're protesting. It's very effective way of campaigning, because if you have celebrities reciting Shakespeare, you will have journalists there filming them. This makes good television. Obviously it makes good television. And so there was a lot of good publicity for the actors and good publicity for the campaign. And because of this, they were successful in their campaign. Ultimately, English Heritage were forced to give £11 million to compensate the landowners and also to pay for 6 months more archaeological work. Not only this, but the plan of the building was transformed. So rather than building on the side of the roads, they built over it. You see in the picture here, you can still visit the roads. It's protected in the remains of the building, and the outline of it, you can see the outline laid out there. So the archaeology has been protected. And not only that, 2 years after the campaign, there was a fundamental change in the law around archaeology in the UK. And this is around the planning policy. And this says that now, well, the law has changed again now, but at the time it said, if you are constructing a site, if you're building something, you have the responsibility to pay for a proper archaeological survey of the work. And this led to the explosion in commercial archaeology, the huge amounts of archaeological work in London and across the UK. Because now it's compulsory, or it was compulsory, to do proper archaeological assessments, even just documentary assessments before work took place. So this is an example where public protest worked. It worked in terms of protecting this bit of archaeology, and it worked in terms of changing the law as well. Great. But now I want to talk about the bigger issues. I've told a bunch of stories from the history of archaeology. And yes, most of them English heritage are the bad guys. That's a coincidence. I could do a similar thing about stories of archaeological work on Native American and African American archaeology in America, where there's been huge amounts of careless destruction of African American heritage and Native American heritage, and protests and occupations of those sites, and violence by the police, and unhelpful involvement of archaeologists in those as well. This is a global phenomenon very much, but these are the cases that I'm most familiar with because I know some of the people involved. So what do we need to think about these things from public archaeology perspective? Why is it important to think about these things? The people taking part in these protests, they are one of our audiences, one amongst many audiences for archaeology, but they are, in a way, the easiest one. They're the ones who already care about archaeology. You could say they actually care about archaeology more than we do. Maybe they care too much. That's a discussion we could have about whether there is such a thing as caring too much about archaeology. What do we take away from these stories as public archaeologists? The people protesting to protect archaeology often have a different understanding of archaeology to the one that we have as archaeologists. So if we look at something like the Wood Quay example, what we are hoping for as archaeologists is the effective, careful excavation of a site to extract as much information as possible. What that means is we want to see the site destroyed completely and transformed into an archive of artifacts, photographs, reports, drawings. That's good archaeology. Something we fail to communicate to the public a lot is that good archaeology can look like destruction. So when the Irish archaeologist said it's just a hole in the ground, he was technically true. By the point he was talking, most of the site had been excavated. The material was removed. What was left was an empty hole in the ground. There is an idea amongst the public that it is possible to just leave everything as it is, to just preserve, protect for eternity. And there is some idea that this is the function of archaeologists. We are the protectors of heritage. We leave everything in the ground. Or conversely, we dig holes and find a treasure. No one's quite sure which one. But this misunderstanding by the public of the destructive aspect of archaeological work is one of the things behind some of these protests, I think. And again, this is something where a stronger, clearer public understanding of archaeology would be helpful. The other question is about this idea of ownership. Is it to the advantage of the archaeology and the archaeologists if we have a population who feel a sense of ownership of their heritage? I mean, that for me, yes, absolutely. For me, the role of public archaeology is to build a sense of connection between people and archaeology. We want people to feel that connection, to feel a sense of connection with the past, but not necessarily ownership. The problem with ownership is you can say, this is my past, it's not your past, it's not your past. Connection with the past, a sense of a human connection with people in the past is something much more egalitarian, something much more open. When you start to promote the idea of ownership, you feed into nationalism, bigotry, and the kinds of unhelpful perspectives on the past which lead to the creation of conflict.
It depends, however, because you can transmit the idea that the heritage belongs to everybody.
But that's a different kind of belongs, I think. But no, I agree.
I think it's fundamental that people get linked to heritage or think heritage belongs to everybody, because it's the only way that we can preserve the heritage. There are too many objects, landscapes, buildings and so on that are part of the heritage, that if people doesn't feel connected to them, we cannot protect everything. It's the only way. That's what we are doing when we are doing projects and so on, trying that people feel connected to them, to their heritage, in order not to destroy it. That's the only. So my objective is just transmitting this sense of connection.
And this is the problem when you have public archaeology in places where the politics of the place is complex. And a good example is southeast Turkey. So in Turkey, the national heritage, national archaeology is the archaeology and heritage of Turkey. So for the Kurdish regions of Turkey, where you have the Kurdish minority, who are subject to a systematic genocidal destruction of their language, their culture and their heritage, you see destruction of Kurdish archaeology because it's not national heritage. It's not Turkish heritage, therefore it's not protected, it's not national. It's not ours, it's not ours. So this is the problem of having heritage protection at a national scale, is you will have minorities of all kinds being excluded and being harmed. And you could argue the Druids in England, annoying as they are, in my opinion, are a minority whose perspective on the past is not being respected because they are a small, strange minority. Now, the examples I've talked about, there is conflict. There's conflict between the public and the people who control heritage. And if you look at some of the coverage of the Rose Theatre example, they have a platform, there's actors speaking about the importance of Shakespeare, blah, 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 and then a man from English Heritage will come, and he's asked to talk to the crowd. He comes up, he says, "I'm from English Heritage," everyone goes, "Boo!" That's a problem. This is the problem, that he is seen as the person speaking on behalf of the construction company, the government, the archaeologists. And he says, we're trying to negotiate, we're trying to this, we're trying to that. He's the one who has the economic, practical realities in mind. The people protesting are trying to create a change. He is trying to prevent change. He's not trying to harm the archaeology. He's just saying there is a process, this is what we do. But the conflict is really not with the archaeologists, it's between the state and the protesters, the people with the conflicted sense of ownership. Because the archaeologists, by and large, we don't think we own the material, we just work on the material. And the question is, who do we work for? Do we work for the state, do we work for the landowners, or do we work for the people? And if we're not working for them, which side are we on? And in the cases I've talked about, there were archaeologists on both sides in almost every case. There were archaeologists working for the state or for the developers. There were archaeologists sympathetic with the protests. And this causes arguments and tensions within archaeology as well. When we do public archaeology, often we do public archaeology as part of larger projects which will be politically unpopular sometimes, which will be politically destructive sometimes. On some occasions, the purpose of the public archaeology work is to make an unpopular piece of work more popular with the local community. So yes, we're destroying everything and we're building a car park, but hey, we're going to have an open day. The kids can come and do some archaeology, yay. So we are not innocent in this as public archaeologists. So really this is a question of ethics, and I think most public archaeology issues come down to questions of ethics. When there's a threat to archaeology, threat to communities, and backlash, we have to decide where we are. And this is an image to end on with Stonehenge at the top left, and the control of Stonehenge. So I'm going to stop there for any argument, discussion, abuse.
Questions? Do you have any questions? We started before thinking about the difference also between England and I think it's dramatically different. I think it takes also part of the character of a nation, say, country, where we were discussing also about this, where people strike and where people doesn't strike. And it has a lot to do with the government and the fact that people here, government is good and bad, but it's always their fault. Mostly bad, but it's always their fault. So there's no protest at all. Really, you don't have any question?
How do you think the archaeologists in the heritage could manage in the case of the Stonehenge? So, because you say that they took the wood and put it in a museum against the people, the local people, and the pagans. So how do you think they can manage in another way?
That's a good question. I think it should have been managed through consultation with the local people from a much earlier point. And the consultation should have been much more careful and respectful. And even just, not even consultation, even just information. I think there was a feeling from the local people that the archaeologists were coming in, taking away the archaeology and not speaking with anyone. This is a common thing when I speak with people about their problems with archaeology. Is they say, there's an excavation taking place in my town, but there's a wall around it, and they're stealing our heritage. So I think it is this. If there was just a basic communication to say, this is the process, this is why we're here, this is why we're interested, and this is what will probably happen. We will probably study these remains, we will probably remove them, take them to a museum, hopefully a local museum, and the site will disappear eventually. I think it would have been very easy, in a way, in retrospect, to have managed the situation with more diplomacy. And then when the pagans arrived, they would have still sat on the stones and played their strange musical instruments and stuff, but it would have been smaller, and they would not have had the support of the local people. There was another timber circle appeared very close to that one a few years afterwards, and I think that was handled in a completely different way. They learned from mistakes there. That one I think was just allowed to erode because they didn't want to have the confrontation again.
You talk about these feelings of English people that heritage is yours, okay? But so I've been in England and I visited a lot of this site, but it was really expensive. For me, I'm Italian, so it's not my heritage. But what about English people? They go to something that is yours, and you pay so much because it's good maybe for preservation of this site, but it's really expensive for something that is yours, I think. What do you think about this?
This is very true, and this is a very important point to think about. There's two aspects of this. One is that if something is free, people usually think it's worth nothing. So if you make something a little bit more expensive, they think it's worth more. That's one side to think about, the economics of heritage. The other side is going back to the very start where I said, who is this for? In Britain, visiting archaeological sites, visiting museums, visiting heritage is a middle-class activity. And it's important for people to feel a sense of connection with this, to have the sense that I am doing a middle-class activity. I'm taking my children to a museum where they will learn to become bourgeois. It's important that it has a certain cost. Otherwise, anyone could go there.
And it's wrong.
Yeah.
No, I said that museum is a place for everybody, not all in the past, I would say.
Yeah, but this is what's interesting. I mean, some museums are free. Well, one of the interesting questions I've always thought is a lot of people do not visit museums, and it's very hard to find out why. But one of the things is a lot of people, particularly people who have not been visiting museums when they're children, and again, this is more of a middle-class activity. Your parents take you to a museum. If you do not have this experience, people say they don't know how to visit a museum. They don't know what you're supposed to do. You walk in the door, and then you walk around and you look at everything. They don't understand. People don't know how to do this. So it's alienating, and they just walk past. It's something that's not for them. So I think, yes, these things, even when they are free, there is social barriers.